Welcome to NorCal Tea Party Radio.
All across the nation, the party's just begun. Voices speaking loud and clear, there are battles to be won. Gathered here, reunite, join the revolution, 'cause we are strong and standing tall, upholding the Constitution. We the people say.
And now the host of We the People NorCal Tea Party Radio is Ginny Rapini. Jenny is the coordinator of the NorCal Tea Party.
Welcome to We the People Radio. It's great to have you with us today right here on KTKZ 1380 Radio. I'm Ginny Rapini, and I am with the NorCal Tea Party. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are and what we stand for if you're listening for the first time today. The Tea Party's been misinterpreted quite a bit through the mainstream media, so let me tell you what we stand for. Fiscal responsibility, constitutionally limited government, and the free markets. It doesn't get any better than that, and it doesn't get any simpler than that. And we are not connected to any political party, Republican, Democrat. Frankly, they've both lost their way. We are conservatives trying to bring our country back to her founding principles. And that's who we are. If you want to know more about us, go to our website at norcalteaparty.com. Our guest today is someone that I can honestly say I haven't known, but yet I feel like I have known. I haven't formally met Joshua Charles, but let me tell you my first experience with him. He came and spoke at a Rockland Tea Party group, and we had another event, so I couldn't come. But he did sign a book for me, and the book was The Original Argument, and he gave it to a friend who gave it back to me. The friend said something to him about me, and just a week or two ago, he called me to tell me that he was praying for me, that he had heard that I had been sick with pneumonia and that my daughter was undergoing her second battle with cancer. And he said, you know, we're in this together and we need to pray for one another and work with one another. And I can't tell you how that ministered to my heart. So I want to introduce to you Joshua Charles, who wrote the book, The Original Argument. Welcome, Josh.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
I'm fine, and I feel like I've just given a glimpse of who you are to them. But why don't you tell us a little bit of background about yourself and who you are, other than
Sure.
a very caring young man?
Oh, I know much better people than myself, but thank you for that. I am actually a Rockland native. Grew up in Rockland, at least for 5 years. That was the longest I've ever been in one place at one time. Graduated from Rockland High School in 2006, so consider myself a hometown boy. And so as far as the book is concerned, basically I had read a book about William Wilberforce. In case anybody in your audience doesn't know, he was the leader of the abolitionist movement in Britain. Very devoted Christian man. Spent half a century of his life devoted to this cause. And the book I read was by Eric Metaxas. He's a great biographer. He's done biographies of William Wilberforce as well as the recent Bonhoeffer biography, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was the pastor in Nazi Germany who opposed the Nazis, so it's a completely enthralling book, so I'd suggest it to anybody. But I had read that book about Wilberforce and was just amazed by the absolute dedication that it took to spend 50-plus years, going after a cause like that. I think we'd have a lot to learn from it. And so I read William Wilberforce's book after that, A Practical View of Christianity, but the problem was that the language was very difficult to understand. I really liked it. I really liked what he was saying, but it was like trudging through mud. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't even finish it. To this day, I haven't finished it. I got about two-thirds of the way through it. But it just got so frustrating to read. There was zero joy in reading it. And although what he was saying was great stuff. Around that same time, I had finished reading the Federalist Papers for the second time. And I think it was right around when Obamacare passed. It was March 2010. And I was very concerned about where the country was going. Still am. It wasn't a Republican-Democrat thing. To this day, I'm not a registered Republican, which I hope is to my credit. I stand by the platform in many cases, but am not a Republican. But I was definitely very concerned for the country. But what I was seeing when I read the Federalist Papers, and for those of your audience who don't know, the Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Some very important founding fathers. James Madison was known as the quote-unquote father of the Constitution, and I'm sure John Jay may be a little less known, but he was our first Supreme Court Chief Justice and was also negotiating a lot of things in Britain during that time. And Alexander Hamilton, I'm sure everybody knows him, but for those who maybe don't know, he was the first Treasury Secretary and was also George Washington's military aide. So these guys were very high profile. And what was happening was, after the Constitution was put together by the Constitutional Convention, they had to send it out to the states for the states to ratify. And what would happen was the people would elect representatives to their own state convention. So if California was a state back then, we would have elected some representatives who would have gone to a special convention. This is not the California House or the California Senate. This is a special select body whose only job was to debate and vote on whether or not that state would approve the Constitution and thereby exist under it. And so the problem was that in the state of New York, which back then, as it is now, was very important and very wealthy, it was in danger of not ratifying the Constitution. So these three men went about writing editorials. They were literally editorials, just in the newspapers, if somebody wrote for the Sac Bee or the New York Times or God forbid, even the Placer Herald. So, basically outlining the principles, the technicalities, the details, the reasons why the Constitution was put together the way it was, to basically convince people that it was something that was in their best interest to ratify. And they were actually read more widely. It said that George Washington read them himself, but they have really become absolutely essential reading for anyone who is interested in the Constitution, who wants to know more about it, who wants to know how utterly fundamental it is to our country's existence, not just political, but just how we're all put together. And, it's actually even been cited by Supreme Court cases, I think, about 200 times. Which is really surprising because the Federalist Papers are not law, and in Supreme Court decisions, you're typically supposed to cite previous case law and whatnot. So that really shows their enduring legacy and influence.
Well, isn't it?
So I decided,
aren't they there to? Aren't the Federalist Papers there to help us to understand the entire framework and background and reasons for the Constitution?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay.
And I had written it, and I made this decision, but then, I was a piano performance major. It would probably surprise many people. It certainly surprises me, even to this day, that a piano performance major did this. But, so I decided it, and I showed, there are 85 of these papers, and I had done maybe one or two of them. And I showed them to a few friends and family, and they read it side by side with the original. They said, "Yeah, this makes it much easier to understand, and it doesn't alter the meaning." I was very, very, very careful not to alter the meaning. There are no catchphrases in there like "small government" or anything like that. Glenn and I were very careful about that. Glenn Beck, for those of you who may not know which Glenn I'm referring to.
Is there another one?
He's a wonderful guy, by the way. I'm sorry, what was that?
Is there another one?
Another one? What do you mean?
Another Glenn?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there are plenty of Glens, but the one that your audience will certainly be most familiar with, I'm sure, is Glenn Beck. So I had decided, but literally a few days later, I was watching his show, and he said on his show, again, maybe 2 or 3 days later, somebody should take the Federalist Papers and put them in contemporary English so people can actually understand them. So, of course, my jaw dropped to the floor, and whatever second-guessing and waffling and doubts I had, at least for that moment, were dispelled, and I decided then and there that I would finish it.
So did you feel at that time then that was some type of a affirmation that you should do what you had just begun to do?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it was then and there that I decided that I would finish it no matter what. Now, I finished it that summer. It was very difficult. There were a few times that I almost quit. My longest day was 14 hours. which it's surprising how exhausting sitting at a desk for 14 hours can be. But finished it, and through a long series of very remarkable, I would say, providential events, connections, whatnot, got the book into Glenn's hands.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got it into Glenn Beck's hands?
Sure.
I've heard your story, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, basically, I had been watching his show in December of 2010. And by this time, I had basically given up hope getting a hold of him. I had sent him copies. I had sent him samples. I had sent him letters. I had sent him emails. I had waited on hold for hours on the radio show. And one day I got really, really close to getting on and being able to talk with him and tell him about it, but I didn't make it. And it's actually funny, just as a side note, I met the guy who was controlling the calls that day. I met him after the book was published, and I was on the radio, and I was in New York. And he came up to me and apologized to me.
Oh, wow.
He said, I remember you because you were telling me behind, and I'm so sorry, just couldn't get you on that day. and here it was. It was very funny. So, but anyway, I had been watching his show in December, and he was highlighting a town called Wilmington, Ohio, and basically to give people an idea of how economically devastated this town was, there was a local DHL hub that employed 8,000 people, and this town was a town of 12,000. And that hub was closed over a period of 5 to 6 months, I believe. So the economic devastation was palpable. So he was highlighting it, though, because these people were very unique. They turned to two things that in hard times we don't turn to enough, or, as is the true tragedy, we don't turn to until we have hard times,
Mm-hmm.
and that is prayer and serving each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, you hear cliche things about prayer works, and I don't really care if it works or not. At the end of the day, it's not about getting what you want. It's about being in communion and in touch with the person you should be in touch with.
That's right.
And doing what he wants, which may be quite different from what we want
That's
sometimes.
right.
So, but anyway, I was inspired by this. I was watching it with a friend of mine and just said to him, I'm thinking we need to go there, see what God is doing. I emailed Robin Morris. She was the head of the 24/7 prayer house there that night. And I even told my friend, I said, I get the feeling, I can't explain it, but I just have a really good feeling that we're not even going to have to pay for food and lodging. We didn't ask Robin about anything. We just said we want to come out. That's all we said. So sure enough, 5 days later, she gets a hold of me. I don't even bring it up, and she says, yeah, we can get a host family, and we'll get your guys' food as well.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was great. And so we went out there. We're serving in some ministries, absolutely amazing ministries there that, one of them, Sugar Tree, headed by Alan Willoughby, great guy. We, it went from serving, I believe, a day or two a week to serving the homeless, the unemployed, the underemployed, 6 days a week, about 200, 250 people a day. Rachel Ray had come in, totally renovated the kitchen and whatnot. So, long story short, went there. Some amazing, amazing things happened. It was really spiritually revitalizing. And, Glenn Show had contacted Robin. She was the main contact for this show, and I did not know that. And they had called her and said, hey, any interesting update stories? We're going to do an update show on Wilmington in mid-January, late January, somewhere in there. And she said, yeah, there's these 4 Christian frat guys coming out from the University of Kansas to service some of the ministries. They might make for an interesting story. She didn't know about the book. So they contacted me. I told them. They invited me out to New York to talk about Wilmington. Got in there, and before we started taping the show, which was on a Tuesday, I went up to Glenn, handed him the book, and, of course, he started tearing up.
And I'm going to leave it. I'm going to wait. I'm going to leave it at that. We've got a break, and I'm going to keep everybody on the edge of their seats. So be ready to capture that thought again. We will be right back to Josh Charles right here on KTKZ.
NorCal Tea Party Radio is being sponsored by Big Dog Gabriel Crane. Gabriel has been a huge fan of the Tea Party since 2009. He carries a lot of weight wherever he goes and stands tall for what he believes in. His bite is worse than his bark. Each month we need sponsors to offset the cost of this program. For information on how you can become a sponsor, go to NorCalTeaParty.org.
Gather here to reunite, join the revolution. We are strong and standing tall, uphold
Welcome back to We the People Radio, KTKZ, 1380 AM. Our guest is Josh Charles. Before we get back to him, I want to remind you that we need your feedback. What do you think of the radio show? Are there guests that you would like us to have? We've been getting lots of emails, and you can email us at NorCalTeaParty.com. Go to our website under Contact Us, and you can let us know what you think. You can also find out about our events and meetings that we have at the website, NorCalTeaParty.com. All right, welcome back, Josh. Now, you had us on the edge of our seat about when you first met Glenn Beck.
Sure. So I went in there, gave him the book, and said, Mr. Beck, you said someone should do this, so I did. And handed it to him. And he said, if it's any good, I'll publish it. And I was not even expecting this, but he had the book on his desk, and we were up, filming a show about Wilmington and an update show. And he brought out the book and started talking about it. And so that was a heck of a lot more than I could have expected for that trip. But sure enough, we recorded that show on Tuesday. I believe it aired on Thursday of that week. And then the following Monday, I got a email from his head of publishing, and they said they wanted to do it. And the rest, as they say, is history. It became a #1 New York Times bestseller. And there we go.
All right. Well, I want to know then I want to have a little bit of a sense of what you had to go through in writing this book, The Original Argument. What was the most difficult thing for you to do? And then I want to know the most rewarding.
Most difficult, probably just the time. It was the summertime, and I was, I was in college at the time, my undergrad. I'm working on my master's now, but was in my undergrad, and I was still planning on working and earning some money somehow. But of course, there's the, if at all possible, you'd like to hang out with your friends or whatnot, which I did somewhat, but really not really. And so just the time in isolation, hammering it out, that was probably the most difficult. And also, it just that bred a lot of discouragement. It bred a lot of uncertainty. I can't tell you the number of times I kept questioning, who am I to be doing this? I feel like it's what I'm supposed to do, but I feel totally ill-equipped. Who's going to believe that some piano performance major, did this? And even if they did believe it and accepted it, or took it in to publish it, why? Would anybody else accept it? There's no history degree attached, or no political science degree, so would anybody, accept it as being legitimate? Yeah, no, which is actually, it ended up being the saving grace. I love the fact that I'm just a regular guy that was able to do this. So, the most rewarding was just doing what I felt God was telling me to do, despite the cost. Which, again, it sounds cliche, but really He provided the strength. Again, I can't tell you how many times I just wanted to quit. I was like, this is dumb, this is stupid, I could be saving a heck of a lot more money than I am. The most rewarding part is just, you get a word, you have it confirmed, and you're able to follow through with it. And just seeing how, at the end of the day, and there was a 6-month period, even after I finished it, where nothing happened. As far as Glenn was concerned, I had 2 other publishers who made offers, but they were very, very small publishers and couldn't get nearly the circulation that Glenn's name was able to provide. But just the process of having something you feel you need to do, not seeing the result of it right away, but eventually seeing it, and I'm still feeling the effects of it. And I can't tell you how many doors have been open, and how many opportunities I've had to talk about real freedom, to talk about a new vision of freedom for the country and even the world. And so that's been the most rewarding by far.
Don't you kind of get a sense of awe at times when you see that this is really a political thing that you got involved in, and yet it was a God calling? And it's amazing that God only asks from us to trust Him and to surrender. Yep. And when we do, And we really do. The timing is always right instead of us trying to shove things through the door.
Yeah.
And the timing was so perfect for this. And so it's being used to its full capacity, not just in your life and not just in a few people's lives, but in lives of everybody who's read this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I would really suggest that that's a lesson for Christians, certainly, but for all of us. When I came to speak to the Tea Party, the speech you had mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
it was a packed house, and it was
Mm-hmm.
great, but
Mm-hmm.
I do remember that I was pretty tough with some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why was because, there are plenty of people who have passion.
Mm-hmm.
But, I found that, and I'm just being honest here, I found that the level of knowledge on the Constitution
Mm-hmm.
really wasn't as good as I expected it would be and was hoping it would be.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had to be really honest, and this book is a great resource for people to kind of, navigate through the really complicated language of the Federalist Papers. It's been totally reworded with the sentence by sentence, phrase by phrase, so without the meaning altered. And so it's really important that, especially those of us who are either directly involved in the Tea Party or
Mm-hmm.
who support the Tea Party, we've got to have a longer view of things. We've got
Mm-hmm.
to have better education for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, for the next generation, and we've got to be able to back up this vision of what we want the country to look like with more than just rallies and slogans. It's really got to be informed.
Now, as we wrap up into our last minute, I want to ask you to quickly give us a comparison as to the progress of the founders and the Tea Party movement today.
What do you mean, the progress?
Well, okay, so what the founders were trying to accomplish, how long it took them to accomplish it, and what they accomplished, and then compare that to the Tea Party movement today, what we're trying to accomplish, the timing, and the hope that we have for this country.
Yeah, sure.
We have just about 1 minute.
Yeah, they're night and day, which is something that among Tea Party people, I've noticed, at least in my experience, that sometimes they get two things too quickly, and that is frustration and demoralization.
Mm-hmm.
I can certainly understand both. That's not a problem. But when you look at the long arc of history, when you look at the founders were dealing with issues with Britain 10 years, 15 years before the war even broke out. Then the war itself was 8 years. Then there was an additional 5 or so years before a Constitutional Convention. Then there was another 2 years before the government that was devised by the Constitution could even be put up. So, we're talking, 30 years or so from the initial, crisis of some of the acts that the Parliament was passing to finally having our own government. So we've really got to think generationally. We've got to think long-term. We've got to do, elections are important, but my God, they are not the only thing. And in fact, I would say they are ultimately the superficial manifestation, at least right now, of what ultimately needs to be done. The ultimate work that needs to be done is the individual-to-individual education of our families, of our people, and the spiritual, the reignition of the spiritual flame, individual to individual. That's the hard work, and I'll tell you what, that's a seed that years, decades, generations from now, that will produce far more fruit.
Gotta cut
than
it
just
off.
Focusing on elections.
Thank you so much, Josh. We could talk for another hour. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening today. Be sure to tune in next week where we will have David Llewellyn speaking about the health care bill before the Supreme Court, as well as the immigration issue that is facing the Supreme Court today as well. Join us next week right here on KTKZ 1380.
Go gather here to reunite, join the revolution. We are strong and standing tall, upholding the Constitution.
How to get involved? Individuals who want to become part of the NorCal Tea Party Patriots by attending meetings, events, or receiving action alerts, go to our website at norcalteapartypatriots.org. By signing in as a member, you'll receive our newsletter and action alerts. So get involved. NorCalTeaPartyPatriots.org.